Tonight, my forgetfulness at 63 saved me. I went back to the table to get the scarf I'd left behind and froze when I looked through the mirror. Caroline, my only daughter, was calmly dripping a strange liquid into her mother's teacup. A silent knife was being offered to this Olivia right in the middle of my birthday dinner. But stay with me to the end, because the poisoned tea was not the most terrifying thing. The most terrifying thing was the reason she did it. I stood there numb behind the corner wall. A hand lightly touched my elbow. It was Tessa, the server from earlier. She was pale, holding her phone screen up in front of me as she whispered, "Don't drink that tea, ma'am." I secretly snapped this from her purse when she took out her lipstick. On the screen was a rushed photo of a stack of papers. Cognitive capacity evaluation for Olivia Bennett. Petition for temporary guardianship. Along with a handwritten note from Evan. Monday. Sign transfer / If she resists, file guardianship immediately. I didn't need to read the whole thing to understand that a carefully staged plan to strip me of the right to my own life had already been set in motion inside my own family. "Do you want me to call someone?" Tessa asked softly, her eyes full of concern. I shook my head, my throat dry. "Not yet. Don't say anything to anyone." A stranger was trying to keep me safe, while the daughter I had carried and given birth to was the one laying the trap. Standing on the edge of collapse, I realized that the truth is sometimes crueler than death. If you're as outraged as I am by what I'm going through, hit like and stay with me on this journey to reclaim justice. Taking one slow breath, I walked back to the table. Caroline looked up, her face perfectly put together. In an old memory, she was the little girl who used to clutch a pillow and run into my room whenever she was scared of thunder. But the reality in front of me now was only a woman holding her breath, waiting to see whether her mother would lift that teacup to her lips. "Mom, are you okay?" "I'm fine, just a little dizzy." I sat down, keeping one hand lightly on the edge of the table to steady myself. Evan, my son-in-law, immediately leaned in. "That's what we've been worried about. You've been working too hard." On any other day, I would have thought those words sounded warm. Tonight, they sounded like a summary line in the pre-printed capacity file. Caroline nudged the cup toward me. "Drink a little tea, Mom. It'll warm you up." I smiled, the calm smile I had honed through decades of legal review work. My fingers touched the porcelain handle, then suddenly relaxed. The cup tipped, tea spilling across the spotless white tablecloth and soaking into the hem of my dress. "Oh, I'm so clumsy." I said it in a guilty tone, but my eyes never left the flash of satisfaction in Evan's face. He thought I was really beginning to lose control. The rest of dinner passed like a silent play. In the smell of browned butter and expensive elegance, I sat listening to them talk about lightening my workload and delegating management. This dinner wasn't for my birthday. It was a field test to see whether the prey had grown weak enough yet. When it was time to leave, I refused all help. The savannah night was damp, the smell of earth after rain lingering in the air. My steps were slow but steady, forcing the trembling out of my knees until I was fully inside the car. My phone buzzed, a text from Caroline. "Mom, I'll bring soup over tomorrow, okay? Don't drive yourself anymore." That carefully staged kindness sent a chill through me. I didn't answer. I started the car and drove past rows of oak trees draped in gray moss. Every turn now felt like it was leading me toward a different life. When I got home, I turned on only the small lamp in the reading room. I laid my silk scarf over the back of my husband's leather chair and stood quietly in front of the photo of Caroline beaming on the day she graduated from law school. I had once believed sacrifice could buy kindness, but tonight I understood. Memory is a kind of power, but truth is what actually keeps a person alive. Caroline's law school graduation photo sat on the table. She was smiling brightly, holding a bouquet of pure white flowers. That day, I cried not because I was exhausted from years of carrying debt on my shoulders, but because I believed every sacrifice had been worth it. The heirloom pearl necklace I sold, the storm-damaged roof I put off repairing, all of it had been exchanged for a decent future for my daughter. But tonight, the hands pressed so tightly together they had gone numb no longer carried any warmth at all. Evan's voice, the image of that vial in my daughter's hand, kept circling in my mind, leaving behind one wrenching question. When did this begin? Did it begin when the spells of blurred vision started after dinner, with the vitamins Caroline faithfully brought over? Or when Evan first started casually asking about the safe key and the property papers? It turned out the signs of aging they kept mentioning had only ever been a script written in advance. My phone screen lit up again. An old message from Caroline appeared like a warning. Tomorrow morning she would return, carrying a sweetness more poisonous than gunpowder. Don't cry, not yet. I reached for my notebook and opened to a fresh page. Every meal, every dizzy spell, every jar of herbal tea. I listed them all in detail. My handwriting shook at first, but the longer I wrote, the sharper it became. The confusion of a woman afraid she was growing old and weak vanished, replaced by a chilling clarity. Outside, the night was still, but inside this house, nothing was where it had once been. Late in the afternoon, Nora arrived just as the thin bands of sunlight began making the dust in the air visible. Hair tied back, eyes so calm they were nearly iron, Nora stepped inside without hugging me, without pitying me. Have you eaten? Not hungry. Then I'll make tea. Today, I'm not brave enough to watch anyone pour anything into a cup. Nora nodded silently and brought me hot water instead. We sat in the reading room with the curtains drawn. All the evidence came out. Tessa's photo, the falsely labeled vitamin bottle, and my account of the teacup from last night. I laid everything out the way I would evaluate a fraud file. Clear, dry, methodical. For the first time, I had to call my own daughter a threat. Do you still have everything she brought over? Nora asked, her eyes fixed on the bottle. The tea, honey, frozen soup, it's all still in the kitchen. Don't throw anything away, and absolutely do not consume anything else she puts in your hands. Nora stood and checked the side door and the old camera system like it was pure professional habit. Then she set a small key on the table, the spare for the equipment cabinet in the garage, one she had quietly kept for years. In case something happens, we still have another way out, she said softly. The camera feed came up. The front door and hallway were still clear, but the office and the safe sat in darkness. Caroline knew this house too well. She knew every blind spot to avoid. Should we call the police? Not yet. Right now it's only the accusation of a forgetful old woman. I don't want to start from a weak position. They need to expose themselves. That evening, the kitchen became an evidence room. Every tea box and cookie bag went into zip bags with careful date labels. It felt brutal, but the order kept my mind steady. By the time the last label was sealed, the sky had gone deep blue. I realized that in the worst betrayals, what keeps you standing isn't hatred. It's the orderliness of your own mind. When you stop asking, why are they doing this? And start asking, what do I need to do? That's when you take control of your life back. She won't make you wait long, Nora said, typing notes into her phone. Especially with Evan getting impatient. She was right. They were waiting until Monday, and I was waiting for my own kind of justice. I nodded, my insides turning another degree colder. The satisfaction in Evan's eyes last night had said it all. When the tea spilled, he wasn't worried. He was pleased, because he saw his theory being confirmed. To him, I wasn't a mother-in-law. I was a file about to be closed, an obstacle weakening exactly on schedule. At 9 p.m., my phone lit up. Caroline was calling on video. Her face appeared in soft light, with a neat, cozy kitchen behind her. The perfect cover for a respectable life. Mom, have you eaten? I had soup. Do you feel any better? Is your vision still blurry? Only on and off. Mom, I really don't think you should be alone. Just for now, until everything is clearer. What exactly is everything? I mean your health. I said nothing. That silence unsettled her, and she rushed to fill it with random talk about school, neighbors, anything at all. People with something to hide are often afraid of silence. When the call ended, both my hands were icy cold. Nora said quietly, "She's checking whether you're still where they want you." I don't understand what I missed to let it get this far. You didn't miss it, Nora said. You trusted her. Those are two different things. The next morning, I spread everything out across the table. Old appointments, prescriptions, eye clinic bills, scraps of notes. Side by side, the signs of aging began to take shape. My worst blurred vision day came after Caroline brought over chamomile tea. 3 days later, the dizziness hit after I took the vitamins she had set out for me. A week earlier, my hands had started shaking violently right after Evan made me honey lemon water. The loose links suddenly locked into one brutal picture. Near noon, Nora's electrician came over to add more equipment. 2 hidden cameras were tucked into a picture frame in a bookshelf, both aimed directly at the document safe. Everything was done neatly, without leaving a trace. Now the hard part begins. Nora looked at me. You have to keep playing the woman who knows nothing. I watched sunlight touch the hall rug. By tomorrow morning at the latest, Caroline would show up again with a container of soup and that sweet voice. I had to let her walk through the door. I had to perform an Olivia who was tired, slow, and just off balance enough for the prey to make them believe the trap was still working perfectly. Nora stood across from me, arms folded. If they come back, do you want me here or gone? The camera screen lit up again, showing the quiet hallway, patient as eyes that had just been awakened. Go before they get here. I need them to believe I'm still alone. I read Megan's email a 3rd time, then turned my phone face down on the table. In the kitchen, the clock ticked steadily. Nora showed me the camera stills from last night. At 11:27 p.m., Evan, wearing gloves, opened the drawer. Caroline leaned in front of the safe. At 12:09 a.m., they left. No hesitation, no uncertainty. People don't hesitate when they've been planning something for too long. What are you going to do about Megan? Nothing yet. I don't need to believe she's innocent or not. I know for sure she isn't. I got up and carried my cold coffee mug to the sink, focusing on the thin sound of the running water just to stay calm. Real pain is usually quiet, leaving a person lucid enough to finish the smallest tasks even when their heart has already shattered. What are you thinking? Nora followed me into the kitchen. I'm thinking if I file a complaint right now, Caroline will cry, Evan will hide behind concern for my health, and Megan will use polished professional language to cover everything up. If that's all it is, then it'll just be my word against theirs. I don't want that. But the video evidence is there. I have enough. Video of them breaking in, the photo of the guardianship paperwork, Megan's email. All of it is valuable. I paused. But it still isn't enough to shatter the mask of devoted daughter they're building. Nora leaned back against the counter. You want them to rip it off with their own hands? I want them to do it in front of the very people they're trying to fool. You're thinking about making it public. I walked into the dining room and stood in silence in front of the old walnut buffet, a gift for our 10th wedding anniversary. The silver-framed photograph still sat in place. Caroline at 16, smiling in a blue dress. Our family in Charleston years ago. All of it belonged to a time before betrayal started taking root behind those smiles. If Caroline wants to play the devoted daughter stepping up for her frail mother, then I'll give her a stage where she believes she's about to win. And where there are enough witnesses, yes. Nora pulled out a chair and sat down. Who? A few longtime friends, 2 people from church, several former colleagues who understand exactly how capable I am. Maybe even this house's financial advisor. And Megan. If there's any professional angle to this, she won't pass up the chance to show up looking like a devoted helper. Evan will like that too, Nora said. Public exposure makes the transfer look voluntary. I nodded slightly. That was the key. Caroline and Evan didn't just want power. They wanted power wrapped in reputation. They needed people to believe I was stepping aside willingly. Greed is often most dangerous when it dresses itself in decency. All through the afternoon, Nora and I went over every piece again. Not because I had forgotten, but because if a story is going to convince other people, it has to stand solidly inside you first. From Tessa's photos to the camera data, to the time Megan sent the email, to the location of the amended financial representative form inside the safe. Everything had to be exact. I also needed to choose the right moment to call Harold Pike so he would understand that this was not a mother speaking from emotion, but a legal battle demanding absolute clarity. Harold Pike answered in the early afternoon. His voice was deep and slow, the kind of voice only a seasoned attorney has, one that never needs to strain to make people listen. We had once been opponents, then became friends, because we both understood that paperwork is never just words. Sometimes it is the last piece of a person's dignity. He listened without interrupting. Olivia, Harold said, the fact that they secretly prepared guardianship papers and entered your home at night is already extremely serious. I don't want to strike yet. I figured. I want them to believe I'm still blind. You're going to let them take one more step. I'm going to let them walk to the place where, once they fall, there will be no way left to disguise it with the word love. If that's the plan, I'll draft the papers for you, not theirs, yours. That is exactly what I need. After the call, the cold inside me eased just a little. I was no longer alone, simply reacting to Caroline and Evan's attacks. I was beginning to control the game at a rhythm of my own. Late that afternoon, Nora left. The house was so quiet I could hear the ice maker drop its last cube into the tray. Walking slowly through the living room, I stopped in front of the old piano, still covered in a thin, orderly layer of dust since my husband died. My fingers brushed lightly across the lid, and memories of Caroline as a little girl practicing sad scales came rushing back. Memory is always cruel because it refuses to bend with reality. It stays as beautiful as it was, even when the people inside it have changed. My phone buzzed softly. A text from Caroline. "Mom, are you feeling any better? If you're tired tonight, I can come by early tomorrow." Looking at my reflection in the glass, I saw the wrinkles of time and the exhaustion, but my eyes were sharp and cold. I was not some confused woman who needed to be led around. I texted back, "Come by tomorrow. Maybe I need to talk to you about a few things." "Yes, I'll come right over. Don't worry about anything." The reply came back in under a minute. The gentler she sounded, the more poisonous it felt. Late that night, Nora came back with a handwritten list of names. We sat under the low yellow light, going through each one. Who was too trusting? Who respected my husband enough to recognize something was off? Who would make Caroline and Evan let their guard down? "This isn't a party," Nora said as she made notes. "It has to be private enough that they won't be cautious, but have enough witnesses that they can't control the story." "I know." "What are you going to call it?" My eyes landed on the silk scarf draped over the back of the chair. An idea came to me, slow but hard as steel. "Just a small dinner," I said, the plan beginning to take shape in my mind. A stage for me to talk about retirement and my assets. One evening, just enough for my daughter to believe her mother has finally let go. Nora looked at me, her eyes holding not a trace of pity. It was the quiet agreement of someone who understood that age can take your health, but it cannot crush the will of a clear-minded woman. "Then," Nora said, pulling the invitation sheet closer, "everything has to look beautiful, so they'll be absolutely sure this night is for them." The next morning I woke early, even though I had barely slept at all. The house was completely silent, that thick silence that only exists in places where people have been rooted for too long. Standing in the kitchen, I made coffee, listening to the steady drip of the machine. I deliberately let my fingers linger on the rim of the mug longer than usual, pretending even the smallest movement had started to become too much. At exactly 9:15 a.m., the doorbell rang. 2 short, polite chimes, but with a touch of ownership, as if Caroline still belonged to this house. The moment I opened the door, her eyes locked onto my face before dropping quickly to my hands gripping the door frame. One sharp glance to check how steady, how slow, and how much clarity I had left. "Mom, did you sleep okay?" She stepped inside, carrying a small gift bag. Off and on. "It's been like that every night lately." I shifted slightly to let her pass, the weariness in my voice carefully measured. Food and drinks were placed on the kitchen counter with a gentle expression that, just a week ago, would have moved me to tears. "I brought soft pastries and herbal tea. You should stop drinking coffee." "I forgot." I lifted my coffee cup, letting guilt show in my eyes like someone just beginning to lose control of her own habits. "At my age, I just do things out of habit." She touched my hand lightly, her voice soft as velvet. "You don't have to keep forcing yourself to act okay." A sentence with no sharp edge on the surface, but underneath it was razor-thin and clear. "Just get weaker, Mom. Make this easy for us." Sitting down at the dining table, I began my performance. Caroline poured water, asked about my sleep, my blurry vision, the doctor's instructions. I answered vaguely, deliberately frowned, and asked the same question twice within minutes. I even misread a number on the electric bill that was printed clearly in front of me. She didn't correct me right away. She just watched in silence, then let out a small sigh. "I'm so worried about you, Mom." "I know." My fingers moved slowly over the fold in the bill, my insides turning cold. Evan showed up right after that, unannounced. His arrival confirmed what I already suspected. Caroline had reported every sign of my confusion from the night before. He walked in carrying a slim leather briefcase, a polite smile already in place. The kind of look worn by someone preparing to lay a knife on the negotiating table. "Hi, Mom. You look better than you did last night." He leaned down and kissed my temple. I looked up at him for a second, then let the wrong name slip out. "Thank you, Thomas." The room froze. Thomas was my husband, and he had been in the ground for 3 years. I raised a hand to my forehead and closed my eyes in apparent shock. "I'm sorry, Evan. I don't know why I just—" "It's okay, Mom," he said immediately, too quickly to hide the eagerness of a man who thought he had just been handed proof. "You're just tired." The way Caroline lowered her head was not to hide pain. It was to hide the satisfaction just starting to bloom. Evan sat down, opened his briefcase, and pulled out a stack of documents. Thick enough to look like ordinary administrative paperwork, but heavy enough to make a frightened person want to sign quickly just to get it over with. "Don't get stressed," he said, sliding the papers toward me in a reassuring tone. "It's just a few temporary authorizations so we can help you with little things like bills, doctors, or your financial advisor. Nothing serious." Taking the stack, I pretended to skim it and blinked repeatedly as if the words were blurring together. In truth, I only needed the first few lines to understand this was not about little things. They wanted the legal right to step into my place. "I don't like signing things like this in the kitchen," I said, setting the papers down and breathing out slowly. Caroline leaned forward at once. "Mom, we're not pressuring you. It's just for safety." "That's exactly why it needs to be done properly," I said, looking up with a carefully performed mix of exhaustion and resignation. "If anything is done, I want it done decently in front of people we know. Later, no one can say my daughter took what was mine while I wasn't in my right mind." Evan's hand, resting on his knee, went still. Caroline spoke first. "You mean, invite people and explain it clearly?" I nodded. "Just a small dinner. Close friends and a few old acquaintances. I'll say I want to rest and start letting you two handle things little by little. That way there won't be any gossip." Silence fell for a moment, but it was the silence of greed cheering. They liked the idea. Of course they did. A public handoff would make their story perfect. Not children taking power from an aging mother, but a loving, voluntary transition. "I think that's a wonderful idea, Mom. Truly very graceful," Caroline said, trying to keep her voice measured. Evan nodded approvingly. "If that's what you want, we'll handle the setup. Just the people who are truly close to you." "It doesn't need to be many," I continued. "A few longtime friends, the Whitmores, Harold if he's free, and 1 or 2 former colleagues. I don't want anything loud," Caroline added quickly as if she had already been planning it. "And Megan too, right, Mom? Having her there for the paperwork side of things would make it easier." I pretended to think it over for a moment, then nodded. She took the bait faster than I expected. From then on, everything moved exactly along the script they wanted. Caroline excitedly discussed the menu and seating arrangement, while Evan promised he would prepare simple paperwork that'll be easy for Mom to read. I sat and listened, nodding absently now and then, or deliberately asking them to repeat things they had just said, enough to make them certain I was sinking deeper into confusion. I even intentionally dropped the pen while signing for a delivery and stared blankly for a moment before asking what day it was, even though the calendar was clearly printed in front of me. Every time I did something like that, the knowing glances between Caroline and Evan grew more pleased. Near noon, they left. Evan closed his briefcase, but left the stack of papers on the table, as if to suggest that everything now was only a matter of time. Before leaving, Caroline wrapped an arm around my shoulders, and the light perfume she wore, a birthday gift I had given her last year, lingered in the air. She rested her chin on my hair and whispered tenderly, "I'll take care of everything. Don't wear yourself out anymore." I stayed in the hug just long enough not to make her suspicious, then stepped back the moment the door closed. Nora came out of the laundry room. She looked straight at me, not needing to ask a single unnecessary question. "They believed it," I said. "Good. Now comes the part where we cannot afford to make a mistake." That afternoon became a quiet, precise race against time. Every video file was backed up in 3 places. an external hard drive, a secure email sent to Harold, and an anonymous cloud service. The photos of the guardianship paperwork that Tessa had captured were printed out and organized neatly in a cream folder. The fake vitamin bottle was photographed carefully. And finally, there was the note from the clinic instructing me to stop consuming any food or drink brought by other people, an objective piece of evidence that carried more weight than 1,000 tears. Everything was ready. Harold arrived late in the afternoon carrying a slim case file. His glasses sat low on his nose, and his face had the look of a man who never wasted a single extra word. "Are you sure?" Harold asked after reviewing all the evidence again. "I have never been more sure." With one firm nod, he pulled out a separate file. "These are your papers, not theirs. Power of attorney for me, an asset freeze, and an immediate revocation of personal access if there are any signs of coercion. Only if you sign these in front of witnesses will the counterstrike truly take effect." Looking at the papers in my hands, I realized my hand was not shaking at all. "What about the police?" Nora asked. Harold turned to her. "I've already made preliminary contact with the local department. If Olivia calls tomorrow night, they'll send officers to document everything. No dramatic arrests like in the movies, just a formal record the moment the truth reveals itself, so they won't have any chance to twist the story." That was exactly what I needed. Not shouting, not cheap drama, but a room full of witnesses where the truth would pin down every word before Caroline could use tears to play the devoted daughter. The night dragged by heavily. I walked once through the living room, looking at the long table already set, the chairs waiting for the guests, and the standing lamp that needed a brighter bulb. Everything looked so calm it was hard to believe this place was about to become the scene of a brutal unmasking. After Harold and Nora left, the house sank into that thick silence that comes the night before a storm. Close to 11 p.m., my phone lit up. Caroline was calling. Her voice was soft and low, as if it carried real emotion. "Mom, I just want to make sure you're not changing your mind." "I'm tired," I said quietly. "But I'm not changing my mind." I could hear the relief in her exhale from the other end of the line. "Tomorrow, it'll all be over, Mom." Looking at the shadow of the oak tree swaying slowly outside the window, I whispered, "Yes, tomorrow it'll all be over." Everything was ready for a performance where the leading actors had no idea they were about to be stripped bare. Before I walked into that room to end all of it, if you believe I'm going to get justice back for myself, leave a 1 in the comments below. The fateful evening had arrived. Nora gave a small nod, then moved toward the laptop connected to the large screen. The room was warm with the smell of butter cake and cinnamon, the soft yellow light creating a fake sense of comfort. Caroline stood close on my right, one hand resting lightly on the back of my chair as if she were ready to support her frail mother. Evan stood opposite, holding a black leather folder against his chest with quiet triumph. "Before we finalize the paperwork," I said, looking up at the guests, "I'd like to look at a few old images. After all, this is a special evening." The whole room smiled in agreement. Mrs. Whitmore touched her chest, visibly emotional. Caroline bent down close to my ear, her voice sweet as honey. "You're really about to make me cry, Mom. You should save your tears." The music and the sound of chairs shifting must have covered my reply. Caroline froze halfway, confusion flashing briefly across her face before she let go of my chair. The big screen lit up, not with happy family photos, but with the angled footage from the restaurant service station that night. The image was clear enough to show me leaving the table, Caroline immediately opening a small vial, tilting her hand to pour liquid into her mother's teacup, then calmly slipping it back into her purse. The room went dead silent, with only the low hum of the air conditioner. "What is this?" Caroline was the first to jump up, her voice high with panic. I stayed seated, looking straight at the screen. The video stopped exactly as her hand moved away from the cup. The silence that followed was heavier than any explanation could have been. "Mom!" Caroline spun toward me. "What is this? Who recorded this?" There was no trace of exhaustion or blurred confusion in my eyes anymore. I looked straight at my daughter. "What do you think it is?" Evan stepped in at once, wearing his usual professional expression. "Everyone, please stay calm. There has to be some misunderstanding. A clipped video doesn't prove anything." "That's right," Megan added from the back of the room, her face pale but her tone still trying to stay composed. You can't draw conclusions from blurry footage like that. Of course, I said. That's why I had no intention of stopping there. Nora placed the cream folder on the table. The documents inside were opened and passed around the room. The air thickened with shock. Mr. Whitmore squinted through his glasses as he read, then looked up at me. His expression completely changed. Olivia, are these guardianship papers? Mrs. Whitmore gasped. Photos taken from an employee's phone last night, I said, my voice unnaturally calm. Taken from my daughter's own purse. Caroline shook her head hard. No, that's not what it looks like. That was just what? I cut in. A backup plan? Or because you were worried about me? The confusion on her face in that moment was the most valuable confession of all. Seeing that, Evan turned to the guests and tried to recover with practiced calm. Olivia hasn't been well lately. We only prepared a few precautionary documents for her own benefit. For my own benefit, you broke into my house at midnight using a spare key? The moment I finished speaking, Nora pressed a key. The screen changed to the second video. A dark hallway, the office door opening, Caroline and Evan stepping into frame as casually as if they belonged there. They went through drawers, stood in front of the document safe, then moved into the room where my husband's keepsakes were displayed and examined each item. Gasps of horror rippled through the room. On the screen, the grainy hallway audio came through clearly enough. If we don't find it, we can still file on Monday. Megan said the memo about Mom handling paperwork inconsistently is already done. Megan went completely still, her face drained of all color. Would you care to explain that? One guest near the door, a man who worked in law, asked sharply. Megan swallowed hard. I only drafted a few internal notes to help transfer the workload if needed. There was no other intention. Internal notes? Harold Pike stepped forward from the back, his voice low but commanding. Or a pre-written document meant to claim that Olivia was no longer mentally competent. Harold's presence made everyone in the room understand that he had not come here as an ordinary guest. He placed his hand on the papers I had signed earlier and declared clearly, what Olivia signed in front of all of you was not a power of attorney for her family. It was a document appointing me as her sole legal representative effective tonight. Any other guardianship petition or asset transfer is invalid. The smile vanished completely from Evan's face. He ground out, You set a trap for us? No. I just stopped standing still so you could lead me around. Caroline stepped forward, trembling, her eyes red. Mom, please listen to me explain. You only what? I stood up, every movement slow but hard. Tested how weak I had gotten, went into my house in the middle of the night to search through it, or prepared guardianship papers in advance in case I refused to sign. The entire room went dead silent. I stood straight, with no trace left of a confused or fragile woman. I stood there so they would understand. Olivia Bennett had never stepped out of her own life. All of you here have known me for years. My voice rang out through the total silence of the room. You knew my husband too, and you knew how I worked. I invited you here not to watch a family fall apart, but so the truth could come out before it was twisted into filial devotion. No one spoke over me. I stared straight at Caroline. From last night until now, you had plenty of chances to stop. Tears began to fall down her face. She shook her head frantically. Mom, I was scared. I just thought if you kept taking on too much work, kept holding everything in your own hands, then what? I cut in. Then you still wouldn't get it? The question landed clean and sharp, cutting off every excuse just beginning to form. Evan tried to speak, but Harold stepped half a pace forward and stopped him cold with sheer firmness, without even having to touch him. Now, Harold said through clenched teeth, the smartest thing for both of you would be to stay quiet. Right then, Nora made a call she already had prepared. Now, she said shortly, calmly. The room was still silent, but it was no longer polite social quiet. It was the thick air that settles when a real face has just been ripped off. The yellow lamplight fell across the silk scarf lying over the back of the chair. If I had not gone back for it last night, I might have been sitting here now as a lonely, weak, disoriented victim inside my own life. Caroline started to step toward me, but the doorbell rang. 2 local police officers and a civilian staff member walked in with notepads in hand. From that moment on, the family misunderstanding performance collapsed completely. It felt as if the room had dropped into a different pressure. The social niceties vanished. The piano music coming from the speakers suddenly felt out of place, until Nora quietly turned it off. The two officers worked with an almost frightening calm. They asked everyone to sit down and recorded each statement objectively, one by one. The woman who had come with them began cross-checking the document list with Harold. Watching that orderliness, that professionalism, my legs suddenly felt steadier. Caroline stood frozen by the fireplace. Evan tried to keep his back straight, but the shell of calm had split apart. Megan had retreated farther into the back, both hands clenched so tightly her knuckles were white. The presence of the police and the written report on the coffee table was the end of every attempt to cover this up. "Mrs. Olivia," one of the officers asked gently, "do you need to rest for a moment?" "No, I want this finished while everything is still clear." Harold began laying it out in the crisp tone of someone reading a legal file. The time the restaurant video was recorded, Tessa's photo, the late-night entry with the spare key, the audio clips, and Megan's emails. He arranged them in chronological order, turning the truth into a logical trap there was no way out of. Tessa sat down in the chair by the window, her voice a little shaky as she spoke about her grandmother. "I know what it feels like to see those papers in a relative's hands," she said, her eyes fixed on Caroline. "That isn't care. It's taking away someone's right to choose." Mrs. Whitmore dabbed at her tears. Mr. Whitmore sat there in silence, his fingers twisting the fabric of his pants to keep himself composed. Leonard, my late husband's old friend, looked straight at Caroline. "If your father were still alive, he would never be able to bear this." My daughter closed her eyes as if she had just been slapped. Strangely enough, I felt no satisfaction. What I felt in that moment was only a deep, heavy exhaustion, like opening wide a room that had been locked for years, only to find nothing inside but dust and broken things that could never be put back together. The officer turned to Evan. "Why did you go into Olivia's house that night?" Evan hesitated, looked at Caroline, then at me before trying to defend himself. "We were worried about her. There were some documents that needed to be kept safe before her condition got worse." "Kept safe by breaking in at midnight?" Harold pressed. "We had a key. Having a key does not give you the right to search through a document safe." Evan went stiff. "You're interpreting everything in the worst possible way." "No," Harold said. "I'm simply describing what the camera recorded you doing." For the first time all evening, Caroline broke down into sobs. Not the carefully prepared, tearful eyes from earlier, but broken, jagged crying like a child. She turned toward me on old instinct, as if even after doing something this terrible, her mother would still be the final safe place to land. "Mom, I was wrong. But I was really scared. I was scared you'd collapse in the middle of all those files, scared everything would spiral out of control." "Since when?" "Since when did you decide the easiest way to live peacefully was to push me out of my own life?" The room went silent as paper. Caroline kept shaking her head hopelessly. "That's not it. Evan said if you just rested, if things were transferred temporarily so it'd be easier to manage, then later." "Later what? When I was no longer clear-minded enough to question you?" She wrapped her arms around herself, breathing hard like someone who had just run out of air in a narrow hallway. Something had truly shattered on my daughter's face. Not exactly a conscience waking up. I was not naive enough to believe one moment could save a person who had gone this far. But at least she now understood that she was no longer standing in front of the mother who forgave without conditions. "I never wanted things to turn into this," Megan spoke up. The female officer looked up from the report. "Turn into what?" "I just thought Olivia needed less pressure. She really was tired, and she had been making mistakes lately. Caroline said her mother wouldn't listen to anyone, so I'm not asking why you were worried," the officer cut in. "I'm asking why your name appears in the audio about preparing a document claiming that Olivia had been handling paperwork inconsistently." Megan fell silent. Looking at her, I suddenly remembered her first day at the office, clutching a stack of worn-out files and saying she wanted to learn the profession the right way, instead of making money off other people's misfortune. It turns out betrayal does not need a loud sound. People only have to switch sides, little by little, until one day they look back and realize they are completely on the other side of the line. Nora set a glass of water in front of me. The cold against the glass made me realize how dry with thirst I had become. Outside the window, the wind was starting to pick up, moving the oak branches in the front yard, leaf shadows shaking across the glass like smeared ink. After nearly an hour of statements, the male officer closed his notebook. Caroline, Evan, and Megan were asked to come along to complete the procedure and turn over the related devices, from phones to the tablet containing the email exchanges about the guardianship documents. The calm of the legal process left them with nothing to cling to, no feeling of being falsely accused. The truth was moving exactly where it was supposed to go. Evan tried to argue again, but one sharp look from Harold forced him to swallow the words. I sat quietly in my chair when Caroline stepped toward me one last time. Less than an arm's length away, this was the face I'd once stayed up all night caring for through high fevers, the face I'd patiently waited for after every dance class. "Mom, please, don't call me that in a child's voice anymore," I cut in. "You stopped being a child a long time ago." She froze there, tears still pouring down, but they no longer meant anything in this room. The female officer stepped up without touching her and said softly, "Let's go." The door opened. There was no goodbye, no reminder to drive carefully like on ordinary evenings. Only the sound of shoes on hardwood and the cold slam of the door closing. The silence after the storm was so heavy I could hear my own heart pounding inside my chest. Leonard was the first to break it. He put a hand on my shoulder, offering no empty comfort. "I'll stay a little longer, if you need me." Mrs. Whitmore sat beside me, her eyes red. "I'm sorry, Olivia. I'm truly sorry I believed that performance." "You're not at fault for believing in something good," I shook my head. I said that, but inside I bitterly realized that I was the one who had believed in the good the longest, and I was also the one who had fallen the hardest. The next morning I woke up before the birds outside the porch. The house was so still I could hear the air conditioner kick on and off, the hallway wood softly tightening in the early chill. Everything was still in its place, the leather chair by the window, the white flowers on the dining table, the standing lamp near the fireplace. Only I was no longer the same. I lay there for a few minutes staring at the ceiling, waiting for that familiar fog to creep back in. The confusion every morning when I wondered whether my vision would blur today, whether my head would feel heavy like it was wrapped in mist, whether my hands would shake holding a glass of water. But this morning, my mind was quiet and clear, like glass that had just been wiped clean. Not because everything was okay, but because I finally understood that I was not going crazy or rotting from the inside the way they wanted me to believe. Slowly slipping my feet into my soft house shoes, I stood in front of the mirror. My face had aged exactly as it should have. My eyelids slightly swollen after a long night, but my eyes were different. The searching, self-doubting look was completely gone. Downstairs I made coffee the same way I had for 20 years. 1 full spoon plus half a small one. Water just at a boil. No herbal tea, no vitamins, no soup brought in by a honey-sweet voice. Just my coffee, in my kitchen, on a morning when I knew exactly what I was drinking. When I carried the cup to the table, the silk scarf Tessa had returned to me last night was still folded neatly over the back of the chair. The fabric felt soft and cool between my fingers. Ordinary objects had suddenly become markers, pulling me back to face the truth. The phone on the table was still silent. No message from Caroline, no missed call from Evan, no checking an email from Megan. That silence did not make me sad. It confirmed that at least this morning no one could control my heartbeat anymore with carefully staged fear. Around 8 a.m., Nora arrived carrying warm toast and eggs. When she saw me sitting up straight with my coffee, surprise flickered in her eyes before quickly softening. "You look more clear-headed than yesterday." "I feel that way too." Nora set the bag down, took off her coat, and studied me one more time as if to confirm it. "How are your eyes?" "I can see every crack on that old ceramic vase," I said, tilting my chin toward the kitchen cabinet. Nora pressed her lips together in a faint smile. "That's good." Breakfast passed without a trace of hurry. Hollow comfort like it's over now or be strong never came up. They would only have tired me more. Nora quietly peeled an egg, pushed the plate toward me, then opened her notebook. "Harold will call at 9:30 a.m. to lock in the next steps before the other side can build a new story." "They'll build one," I nodded with certainty. "Of course. Evan will say he was trying to protect you. Megan will hide behind professional concern. And Caroline, she paused for a beat. She'll lean on the fact that she's your daughter. My eyes fell on the small scratch along the edge of the wooden table, a mark from years ago when Caroline accidentally dropped scissors while wrapping Christmas presents. That night I had laughed and said that anything lived with long enough always carries the marks of the people you love. This time it isn't a mark anymore, I said slowly. Nora did not argue. She understood that some truths do not need to be softened. After breakfast, we walked through the house together. I wanted to open every door myself, pull every curtain, stand in every room, and drive out the feeling that this place had been invaded. The office still smelled like old paper and polished wood. My husband's keepsake room was still silent, except now I knew exactly who had once stood there with calculating eyes. I stopped in front of my husband's pocket watch in its glass case, and the image of Evan lifting it like merchandise in the video last night flashed back to me. That one moment alone was enough to break something inside me. Some people do not need to raise their voices to be cruel. The way they touch the keepsakes of the dead says everything. If you want, I'll help move the important pieces to a bank safe today, Nora said behind me. I will move them, not because I'm afraid they'll take them, but because I don't want anything of his ever placed in those people's hands again. At 9:30 a.m., Harold called. He got straight to the point in his usual way. The police's initial report was complete. Caroline, Evan, and Megan would have to continue cooperating with the investigation. More importantly, the documents I signed last night were already in effect. No one had the right to touch my assets or represent me at this time. You need to change every physical lock and every electronic code today, Harold instructed. At the same time, make a list of everyone who ever had access to your accounts or spare keys. I will. He was silent for a moment, then spoke in a lower voice. Do you have someone with you today? I looked over at Nora. Yes. Good. Don't stay alone right now. I understood what he meant. After a major rupture, people can become soft in sudden moments, when they see an old photograph or a coat someone forgot behind. Harold knew that. I knew it too. But knowing does not mean it does not hurt. My phone lit up just after the call ended. Only 4 words from Caroline. Mom, can we talk? Still the same brief style. No extra words, no apology. It was a door she was trying to crack open again, just enough to test whether I would still step toward her out of old habit and forgiveness. Nora asked softly when she saw my expression change. Her? I handed her my phone. After reading it, Nora set it back down on the table and stayed silent. Outside in the yard, the sun had climbed high, casting a pale but cruelly sharp light over every fern pot, over the car parked in the shade. Nothing about this morning was blurred anymore. My fingertips rested on the screen for a moment before I looked up. I'll talk to her, but not the way she wants. That morning, I did not reply. The phone lay face down on the table like a sharp object that needed to be kept at a distance so it wouldn't reopen an old wound. I wasn't afraid of hearing my daughter's voice. I simply understood too well the tactics of people who like to use softness as a way in. They do not attack with shouting. They slip in with a well-placed mom, and old memories called back at exactly the right moment. The next few days passed in a dry kind of busyness. No kind of justice brings good sleep overnight. There were only lawyers, reports, and phone calls answered when my mind was already worn thin. The locksmith came and changed every lock. The bank confirmed that secondary access had been revoked. Emails from Evan's representative kept arriving, the wording polite to the point of lifelessness. One thing at a time was handled. Slowly, cleanly, and without mercy. The alarm system code was changed. Caroline's access to every account was cut off. The old medical power of attorney was revoked. Megan was officially suspended pending the internal investigation. This was not revenge. This was putting everything back where it had belonged in the first place. In Harold's office, he took off his glasses and stared at me over a towering stack of files. You're doing exactly the right thing. I don't see anything right about any of this. I mean the way you're facing it. Harold closed the file. A lot of people would collapse or get so angry they'd damage their own legal case. You didn't. I looked out at the lawn beyond the window. I'm calm because if I lose control, they'll use it against me immediately. Harold fell quiet for a moment. That clarity is exactly what makes you stronger than they are. I did not tell him about the sleepless nights, about the moment I stood frozen in the laundry room remembering Caroline at 10 years old, wrapping a towel around herself and running through the house pretending to be a ghost to scare me. Or how, when I opened the kitchen drawer and saw the box of chamomile tea she used to like, my heart skipped. Some relationships do not break under major events. They fall apart through scattered fragments of memory when an old familiar face is completely replaced by a brutal reality. Caroline called 3 times in the first 2 weeks. I answered only once after I had prepared myself carefully. Her voice on the other end sounded smaller and far less certain. "Mom, I just want to see you once." "Why?" "Because I want to apologize." Sitting in the reading room, my hand resting on the cool silk of the scarf, I answered, "You can send your apology in writing to my lawyer. From now on, everything should be handled that way." "Mom, are you really going to treat me like a stranger?" "No. Sometimes strangers don't do what you did." The sound of the line disconnecting was dry and hard. My hand was shaking, but it was the shaking that comes from daring to name the truth, not from confusion. After that, I buried myself in clearing out the past, working with a realtor, opening drawer after drawer, deciding what would stay and what would go. Every object was handled with the clearest hands I had left. The oversized furniture, the wall lamp I had never much liked, the formal dish set. All of it was sold off without the slightest regret. The only things that stayed were the things that belonged to the soul. My husband's fountain pen, the silk scarf, the pocket watch, and the old photograph of the 2 of us on the porch on a windy October afternoon. Nora helped me pack boxes, label them, and choose the movers. Standing in the middle of the emptied-out living room, hands on her hips, she said half-jokingly, half-seriously, "You're packing up this house like you're handling a property dispute." Well, that is exactly what I'm handling. 4 months later, the paperwork to sell the big house was signed. There were no tears and no sense of losing. If anything, leaving meant choice. Spending the rest of my life in a house where every hallway reminded me of my daughter sneaking in and rummaging around like she was inventorying spoils of war was impossible. The new apartment was smaller, but full of light, with big windows overlooking a quiet park where elderly people strolled their dogs every morning. The kitchen was neat. The living room was just large enough for a bookshelf, an armchair, and a small tea table. Everything was simple, but most importantly, everything had been chosen by a mind that was completely clear. On the first day after I moved in, the smell of coffee spread through the new kitchen. Sunlight fell across the stone countertop. I laid the scarf over the back of a chair, put my husband's pen in the drawer, and stood silently in that peaceful space. I did not miss the old house. I only saw one thing clearly. Loss, if you make it through with your clarity intact, does not make you poorer. It only helps you recognize exactly what is truly worth keeping. After everything was settled, the money from the sale of the house was used to establish a small scholarship fund in my husband's name. With Harold and our advisor, I wanted to support law students who were determined to protect the elderly, fight guardianship abuse, and stop family asset fraud. "Are you sure?" Harold asked as he pushed the pen toward me. My fingers touched the paper without the slightest tremor. "I've never been more sure. Your husband would probably like this." "He'd say I'm still too soft." "Maybe." Harold gave a faint smile. But this time, it's softness in the right place. That night, back at the apartment, I cracked the window open and let in the smell of damp grass, then pulled the scarf over my shoulders. The silence now was no longer emptiness. It felt like a room that had finally been locked properly. A legacy is not found in mansions, bank accounts, or antiques, things that can easily be counted, transferred, or fought over. The real legacy is refusing to let kindness be used against you, refusing to let gentleness become evidence of incompetence. People often confuse a person choosing silence with a person knowing nothing. At this age, I have learned that the most valuable thing I had to keep was not the house I sold or the antiques packed into wooden crates, but the right to remain the author of my own story. I stayed silent for a long time, not because I was blind, but because I needed to see everything clearly enough that when I finally stood up, I would not have to argue another word. I simply closed the door that no longer belonged to me. It turns out kindness without teeth is just weakness. I chose to remain a kind person, but a kind person with boundaries and enough clarity to protect herself. The most valuable thing I kept after the storm was not money. It was a soul no longer afraid of the truth. I'm not telling this story to ask for sympathy. I only want to say that a mother's kindness is sometimes a choice, not a sign of weakness. And when that choice is abused, we know how to take it back, calmly and decisively. Sitting by the window in the mornings, I came to understand that the answer to every loss sometimes lies in the clarity we manage to hold on to in the end. If Olivia's story touched some corner of your heart, leave a comment, hit like, subscribe, and share this video so I know I'm not alone on this journey. And I truly want to hear from you. Have you ever had to choose to stand up while inside you were still full of wounds that had not yet healed? I'm still here, and I'm listening.